So this discussion is around entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is something of integral importance to the IDC, who are a very important part of our Women's Leadership Conference today. But it's also a very important discussion around the heartbeat of a developing nation like South Africa. And the tack that we're going to take today, before I introduce you to our panelists, is how can we embrace entrepreneurship within our organizations regardless of the size. So sometimes we think of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship maybe a little too narrowly. We think about entrepreneurs as people who run small businesses. But increasingly, when we think about innovation and we think about competitiveness, entrepreneurship is the kind of energy that we need to include in our company culture regardless of its size. That's very much what we're going to try and cover today. So we're going to go in the order that the panelists are sitting next to me. Next to me, I do not have Margie, as you might see from the pic. Margie, unfortunately, has flew in Cape Town, but she has been replaced very ably by Agnes Sibanda, who is a program director at Alan Gray Fellows, and who works very closely with young people who have entrepreneurship ability and talent, and then they go on to fund them and support them in their careers and tertiary education. Next to her, I have Tracy Webster. Those of you who heard the SAFM interview with Siki Mgabadeli heard some of Tracy's insights. And Tracy has done some wonderful work, not only in her current role as CEO of the Branson Foundation, but she's been a social entrepreneur for many years. So I'm going to ask her to touch on that as well. So we broaden the conversation around entrepreneurship. And next to Tracy, we have Rapalang Rabana, who spoke for us at our Wired Women Conference in September. She's flown up from Cape Town to be with us, and it's always a very good sign. We're not only when we invite somebody back, but when we fly them back in again. She's a remarkable young entrepreneur whose story I think you need to hear, and it's a story that she's telling young people around the country as well. So those are our panelists, and I'm going to kick off by asking each of them for their definition of entrepreneurship. So let's start off right there.
Morning, or is it afternoon? So the way I would define entrepreneurship is that I think it's using innovation and creativity to create value. So I'll speak especially in line with the work that we do at the Alan Gray Foundation. I think that what we've learned is that entrepreneurship isn't just about creating business, because all businesses is social by its nature, is the view that we take. So our focus tends to be more about entrepreneurial leadership, and so entrepreneurship for us becomes about a mindset in which you use innovation to create value.
Yeah, I would echo what you've just said, and I think the people that I've had the privilege of working with are just bold, tenacious individuals that see a creative idea. Often it might be wanting to solve a social issue in their community, or it might just be a really good business idea. They've spotted a gap and they've come up with something. But they are so tenacious and so driven that it doesn't matter how many times they get knocked over, they'll stand up and they'll pursue that vision until they see it realized.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would add to that by saying that I think entrepreneurship is about solving a problem that's relevant and personal to you. So this is why it can be in any industry and in any function. It's really about identifying a situation that you think should be better or can be fixed, and deciding that you're going to actually step into this and try to figure something out for yourself and solve it innovatively or creatively in a way that's not being done or do it better than what's already being done in the marketplace.
That's interesting, because that leads me into the next theme that I wanted to speak about, which was around social entrepreneurship. And that, I think is probably the accepted term around the definition for social entrepreneurship right now, is identifying a problem in society, creatively coming up with a solution in an entrepreneurial way, where there's a revenue model attached rather than just a volunteering or giving out funding model like Lolly spoke about yesterday. Do you think that the same definition applies to entrepreneurship in general? Can you flesh that out a bit for me?
I remember last year someone actually asked me, but you're a social entrepreneur by the way you're talking. I was like, huh? I'm just doing something that was interesting to me. And I struggled initially with the concept of social entrepreneurship because I feel by definition that someone decides to do something, and regardless of the fact that they make money out of it or not, is a social benefit, is some kind of social value add. So on a personal level, I still struggle with the definition. Ultimately, as a business, we had to sustain ourselves and make money, but it didn't mean that we are less social in our ambitions.
And you, Tracy?
I would agree with you, and then at the same time, I look at somebody like Richard Branson, who kind of just innovates on what is already out there. So, for example, he didn't invent the aeroplane. But what he got frustrated with was that he was so uncomfortable sitting on an airplane, and he was frustrated kind of with the flight experience. So he just innovated on that and said, I want to have a television screen in front of me. I want to pick what channel I look at. I want to have decent food. I want to, and there are a whole lot of things that he innovated on. So I think it's definitely somebody that's creative, somebody that's frustrated with kind of the status quo and wants to push something forward. And again, I think he's doing amazing stuff with Galactic, saying, I want to change airspace travel the way we know it today. I want to see in years to come that we can get to Australia or to America in 3 or 4 hours. But, people have been going to the moon and going to space for a long time. But he's just saying, how do we make that available and accessible commercially? What does that look like? So it's just those people that are thinking out of the box or looking at something and saying, how do I play with what's here and change it? I think there's that aspect as well.
How does it affect my life, and what would I like to see better in my life?
Exactly.
Sometimes entrepreneurial ideas or great innovations we recognize when we see them, but it's quite hard to know what those qualities are. Even though we bandy sort of terms around, it's quite hard to know what those qualities are when we look for them in other people. Agnes, what are some of the qualities that you look for in your young fellows before you decide that these are the kinds of young individuals who have the entrepreneurial qualities that Alan Gray Orbis wants to support?
Well, at the risk of sounding like an advert, I'll tell you the 5, what we call pillars that we look for. So we're looking for a track record of excellence. And for us, excellence manifests in different ways. It's in the things that excite them. So whether it's sports, academics, stuff they do at church, socially, whatever it is. And we also look for initiative. So we're looking for someone who is showing traits that they are a self-starter, that they're able to, to start stuff on their own. And we look for what we call spirit of significance. And for us, that kind of resonates with the question on social entrepreneurship. So I think it's young people who can look around in their context and understand that they have a contribution to make. And who see their contribution in terms of making it a real legacy and leaving a real legacy in the nation. We also look for courageous commitment, so people who aren't afraid to get knocked down and stand up again. And at that age, I suppose it's little things like we had a girl who said she'd entered the beauty pageant at her school. This was in an interview. And she determined she was going to win. She called everyone she knew. She'd even practiced her walk, which she did for us in the interview, only to lose. And for her, that was an epic moment. And those are, lessons that are relevant at that age group. And then the last one, I have completely lost my train of thought, but I'll get back to you on it.
Well, I'll give you one because I love that courageous commitment, as a bit of a serial entrepreneur myself. Some have worked, some haven't worked, but I think that resilience, or what you call courageous commitment, is quite an important quality because, if you sort of fold every time the going gets tough, then that's really the end of it. Rapalang, tell us about how resilience has shown up for you in your entrepreneurial journey.
Sure. I mean, I think on a personal level, the journey of entrepreneurship for me is, I think of it as sort of 3 steps. First, you know yourself and figure out exactly what resonates with you personally and on a very fundamental level, and then you figure out how you plan and you figure out how you're going to do it. If you need more skills, where you're going to get them. And then that last step of sort of you don't give up and you just have to keep going. And even I think Tyler Perry in an interview made a comment that most people sort of give up too soon, and you haven't pushed through for long enough. And I think it's been critical for us, and I often say that we've probably used all 9 lives as a cat or something, and we're very lucky to still keep going. And somehow that persistence is by far the most defining factor between entrepreneurs that sort of give up along the way and those who keep going. Jim Collins in his book Good to Great also commented on, there isn't this, most people who start a business think that you're going to have this day or this moment where you're going to be successful and it's done and you've got the tick. And the big thing is that there isn't this defining moment of success. There isn't this lucky moment. There isn't this moment where it all becomes relevant. There isn't this one miracle moment. It's about keeping going day by day and decision by decision and tier by tier, and only the persistent effort actually yields results.
How about you, Tracy? Where's resilience shown up personally?
I think, jeepers, I think I learned resilience on a trading floor at Deutsche Bank 10 years ago, where I had actually come out of being an actress, actually, and acted my way through the interview, because that's what actresses can do really well. They know how to audition. So I put the suit on and I interviewed a whole lot of friends in the banking environment, and I was horrified to find that I had the job. And I arrived on a trading floor in Deutsche Bank in the UK with 800 people on the trading floor, and had some spectacular moments where I made a complete fool of myself. But I remember coming clean with my boss and just saying, look, I don't know the first damn thing about banking. This is the truth of the matter. But I do have resilience because I've worked with enough temperamental directors in my life to know that I'm not going to be affected by 800 men on a trading floor. And it honestly was a school of hard knocks. And the whole gender thing was rife. But I think it taught me so much around not taking things personally and being very analytical about what you can learn. And I think that stood me in good stead in Starfish when I set that up in South Africa and did that for 7 or 9 years, I think it was. And I think there were many moments in that time where I wanted to give up, where I felt the burden was just enormous, being responsible for 22,000 children's lives. But I think you've got to surround yourself with the right people, and you've got to make sure that you've got a good support network that are feeding into you as much as you're feeding out. And I learned some very hard lessons and burnt out spectacularly there as well. But the biggest lesson I've ever learned came at the Archbishop Tutu Fellowship, where somebody said something so profound, and I've really taken that on board. First of all, Tracy, do you always want to run the sprint really hard, hit the wall and fall down? Or do you want to start looking at what it looks like to run the marathon? And so I've been sitting with that a lot. And then I think the most profound thing for me, because I lost another organization which was very, very, very painful to me, and I really went into a kind of state of depression. And somebody said to me, be analytical about your past and emotional about your future. Because if your emotion is tied up and your passion is hooked into the past, you're only ever going to stay in the past. But take all of that passion and all of that energy and plow it into your future vision. But stop and look back and be analytical about the past and take those lessons and use those to go forward. And I think that's kind of really standing me in good stead for where I am right now.
Oh, that's great. I'm going to repeat that. Be analytical about your past and emotional about your future.
Yeah.
And usually we are exactly the opposite.
Yes. Constantly have to remind yourself to do that.
Now, what else you said, of course, and we've spoken a lot about tension and diversity and disagreement over the last 2 days, and I love the paradox because we've spoken a lot about authenticity, yet you've raised how important it is to sometimes act the part. And sometimes we have to act as if before we are, which is, I love that. Now, Agnes and I had a long conversation before the conference, and part of what you told me, I hope it's not too revealing, is that you don't always look like a corporate animal. No. So would you like to tell us a little bit about that paradox for you personally and how it works being those two people in the corporate world?
Well, I made the confession that I'm a hippie at heart. So I'm that person who wears, yes, green skirts and colorful scarves. But I think for me, I suppose the issue around it is that sometimes you're required to play a role, just like Tracy was saying. And I think in order to play a convincing role, a lot of it starts with the way you look and how you project the role. And so I suppose one of the challenges is finding your place as an authentic human being. Rapalang spoke about self-knowledge as one of the entrepreneurial one of the aspects of being an entrepreneur. And I found that one of the, I suppose, challenges is giving ourselves permission to be several things. So my best friend once told me that I'm a fraud because I'm a chameleon. I'm a chameleon. But I don't think I am, because I like to think I'm all those things. A few years ago, we had a speaker in the foundation who spoke about every person having a portfolio of passions. And I think it is true. I think at different times in your life, different things become important and significant, and those are the things that you pursue. But you are all the things that you're required to be. And at the time that I'm required to show up as a corporate professional, that's what I will project, because it enables me to then also be authentic in that space. Or I suppose also for people to experience me as someone who's meeting them halfway. Because I think sometimes also as entrepreneurs, especially, I'm also from a tech background, is that it's easy for people to think that you're dissident or different because you pitch up in jeans and a t-shirt and holes and whatever. But I think that it then also becomes about meeting the different types of people around you in the way that makes it easy for people to receive you and interact with you.
Great, thank you. One of the reasons, I mentioned the Wired Woman Conference earlier, and one of the reasons we had that conference is because we felt that women are underrepresented in the digital economy, and that not enough young women are seeing women leaders who are leading technology. So Rapalang, I'd like to ask you, you shared with us at that conference why you decided to study computer science rather than another subject, because there was obviously a wide array of choices to you. And I'd also like to know about some of the entrepreneurial role models that you looked to when you started Jago. So those are two questions. First of all, why you studied what you did, and your role models.
Sure. So after matric and I was in school in Parktown in Johannesburg, I was really at that rebellious stage where I thought I really didn't want to study university. I was tired. I wanted to take a gap year. But my parents, being diligent black parents, said there's no such thing, and off to university you go. My older brother was actually studying at UCT at the time, and I said, listen, Mom and Dad said I have to go to university. Pick something, because it all looks the same to me right now. So he picked a business science, computer science degree, and he was obviously taking a piss at his little sister, knowing that I've never really done programming in my life. And it was a terrifying experience, the first class, to see code. And I obviously considered other options and tried to find a way out. And I looked at finance, and I looked at economics and accounting and everything. And for me, what ended up disturbing me was I thought, but if in accounting and economics and finance and in auditing and marketing, I'm spending so much time analyzing and reviewing and evaluating something someone else did. But with computer science, I could actually create something from scratch. You could have an idea and build an application, and you can produce something. And it was the creative production of something that seemed a little bit more interesting to me. So I ended up sticking with it and managed to get that through. And eventually, when we finished, I had some classmates who also wanted to avoid the corporate world, and that's how we started a technology business. In terms of my role models at the time, There wasn't a woman in technology who I sort of looked up to. It was much more about watching my own parents for me. My mother herself was an electrical engineer, which for her generation was quite remarkable. So she had always been in school only with boys, and she only had male friends, and it wasn't absurd to me to study a science career at all. And her own tenacity in doing entrepreneurial things. By then, both my parents were running their own businesses because of the sort of disgruntlement and frustration they'd had in their professional careers. So I thought, but why am I going to do that to myself? I might as well just get straight to it since you guys ended up there anyway. So my parents probably were my biggest influence then, and only in the course of my career have I met more women in the field.
And now you're a role model to other young women. Lolly Dangalezi spoke yesterday about how in Africa we tend to consume rather than create content. And her inspiration to create content as an educator and as an actor, she combined the two, was motivated by that desire, which is quite similar. So let's talk a little bit about Africa, because you have, Tracy, quite a broad insight into various social enterprises. You've worked for quite a few foundations. Where do you think some of the opportunities are? It's a very big question for entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs in South Africa right now.
I guess I'll just start off with this stat that's quite alarming to me, and just my background has been working extensively with orphan and vulnerable children across the continent. But 50% of Africa's population is under the age of 18, and there are so many children that haven't been lucky enough to have parents involved in their lives and role models. And I remember doing some research in actually the Valley of 1,000 Hills, and we canvassed about 7,000 children that were orphans, asking them what their dream was and who their role models were. And it was really horrifying because the majority of the children on the question, what is your dream, was none. And then who were your role models? And there were consistently three things that came up. One was the taxi driver, one was 50 Cent, and one was to be a soccer player. And it got me so distressed because I just feel that there's such an enormous amount of talent in our country, but we're not showcasing our role models. And we're not bringing these role models and these amazing stories, very much like the woman that's sitting next to me today, into the homes and into the hearts of our children. And I think there's a huge opportunity in the technology space, in particular in mobile, to capture these stories of these women and many of the women that are in this room today, and to make that available on mobile technology. Because what I've come to realize is that while children might not have shoes on their feet, somebody in that family will have a mobile phone. And we need to be really smart around how we using that mobile technology. How are we using it to create education applications? How are we using it just to tell mobile stories for kids? And I think there's a massive opportunity for us to leapfrog many of the issues that we have to overcome in South Africa and across the continent. And there are amazing things already happening in the mobile technology space in Ghana around harnessing mobile for health. And I think we're actually positioned for something quite astounding. And I think we have an amazing opportunity in Africa just to start leapfrogging and coming up with amazing solutions for some of the biggest issues actually that the world faces.
In fact, Ushahidi, which those of you who know the digital world will know that case study. You can follow Kenyan Pundit on Twitter. She is globally recognized. She's now with Google, but she's globally recognized as one of the pioneers in using innovative mobile technology in South Africa. In Africa, not in South, but South Africa has a lot of work to do as well. Agnes, I'm going to ask you a question based on your experience, then we're going to open some questions to the floor. You've worked with young people who you've identified with talent, and then they've been placed in some of the biggest, most prestigious corporates in this country. How do you think their entrepreneurship or the entrepreneurial abilities are showing up in those organizations? Because they're not using their entrepreneurship abilities in the traditional sense of starting small businesses, but how are they transporting some of those skills into organizations from the people you've been exposed to?
Well, the biggest way that they're doing it, I think, is the way that they take opportunities within their workplace. So I think, firstly, because they are quite talented, they do have the privilege of, being shortlisted by some of the top firms, and it's the usual suspects: McKinsey, Deloitte, Goldman, etc. But I think for me, what's been gratifying to see is the manner in which they then conduct themselves once they're in the workplace. So I'll give you an example of a couple of them. One of them is a young lady who's 24. She works for an engineering firm. She's an engineer. And she's basically, she took on what was an incredibly dull project in her organization as a graduate. And because she did it so well, she was able to distinguish herself and have an entire business unit built around her, which she was then asked to lead. Within this business unit, she then has influence on how infrastructure spend happens across the continent. And going back to your earlier question about Africa, one of the things we found remarkable is the ignorance about Africa among South African children. We did a survey, a survey with a questionnaire a couple of years ago with them, and the average score was 20%. American children in their first year of university are required to take African studies as a course. We don't do that on this continent, which I think is alarming. And so we have young people going into organizations that are growing across the continent who are shockingly ignorant. And so we've introduced, the study of Africa as one of our courses. But she then, for us, becomes one of the people who, who's an example of that. And then we've had two other fellows. One has just been invited to join a tech venture capital company. And essentially what they do is they replicate some of the biggest online models from around the world for rollout in Africa. So he's just joined them as a manager. I met with him yesterday, and he was talking about his dreams within that. And so I think, to answer the question in brief, I think it's the manner in which they then take what are typical graduate opportunities and turn them into a real differentiator for themselves within the workplace.
Great, thank you.